Today we're gonna check out all the classes and I'm gonna tell you whether you should play them or not, and I am gonna try to be as objective as possible. I am not gonna try to tell you about my particular taste, because for example, I love the Druid, and yes, this is gonna be a very painful experience. As you guys know, vanilla balance it doesn't exist, and that will show up in the tier list. So let's talk about it. First of all, we got the Druid. If you're a Druid, you're most likely gonna be doomed to heal. Now, before I talk about the rest of Druid on its own, let me tell you, the Feral Cat is not as terrible as you might think if you're Alliance. Now we do not have the debuff limit, so you can put Seal of Wisdom on the target. Judgment of Wisdom, I mean. And that means that Feral Druids can power shift in the Alliance, and they are deceptively okay. They are not terrible. They are like a Hunter worth of DPS. They are still not meta, and they will not be meta, but that's something, I don't know, I just want to dispel a couple misconceptions. The bear tank, okay? The bear tank, it is probably the strongest spec for a Druid, and that's very ironic because you are not gonna see a bear tank ever almost, and that's for a simple reason. It is slightly worse than the warrior, and it turns out that even if you're just 5% worse at tanking than the warrior, 5% when you are the single point of failure of the raid is an intolerable 5%. It is not something you can live with. If you get the manual crowd pommeler, you can pump a very decent amount of threat. You are decently tanky. There is not the bear is not that bad. I swear it is not that bad. I will be the first one to tell you that, but it is worse than a warrior. And even if you're losing 5% threat on the tank, that is 5% less DPS for the entire raid, and that's the problem with threat in vanilla. Finally, the resto Druid. That's gonna be the meta, so to speak, spec of the Druid. Now here's the thing. Resto Druids are the worst healer in the game. They do not have a lot of good output, their HOTS do not stack, and that is a huge problem because you can only take one Druid, you can only take one healer Druid in a raid, or you are wasting a bunch of heal over time effects. So in turn, you only take one Druid to the raid ever, and that's for the buff, Mark of the Wild, and that's gonna make it so the Druid is a D. The Druid is, sadly, I know, I love the Druid, but sadly it is the worst class in all of vanilla. It just sucks. There is nothing that is really good at, there is nothing that makes you want to take a bunch of them, it's just there. Now the Hunter, okay? The Hunter is quite a handful. It is really fun in PvP. I am gonna try to stay out of PvP for this tier list. I will just try to casually mention it. But the Hunter provides a decent amount of DPS in tier 1, and then it just stays at the same damage. It doesn't scale at all, so it's gonna fall off a cliff. It is still decent to take a bunch of them in tier 1 if you wanna do that. It is not a terrible thing. It provides pretty much zero utility. Now what the Hunter brings to the table, tranquilizing shot. You are always gonna need at least one Hunter, and if your guild is not very good, 2 Hunters is probably the play. Blackwing Lair, for example, if you have only one Hunter, you can trank all the bosses, but if the rotation is not perfect, or if the guy is not paying attention, or whatever, maybe he dies, Hunters are not very good at the game. Having a second Hunter is not a terrible idea to make sure nothing wrong happens. Most of the time, they are the best class at farming gold. They can do dire mole tributes, they can just farm mobs in the overworld. They are very convenient for that, and they are deceptively useful in dungeons. If they are dropping the slowing traps, they are really helpful. So overall, I would say the Hunter is gonna get a nice B. Now the Mage is the best caster DPS in the game. It doesn't show that way in tier 1 because all the bosses are resistant to fire, and that's a problem, but after they can go fire, they will become like very high scaling. There is not a single better AoE class in the game, so that's also a thing, especially for lower skill guilds. They are gonna struggle with a bunch of trash packs if they do not have a lot of mages. The Mage is in theory the best class for gold farming in the game because they can just AoE dungeons, and apparently we are getting the Maraudon 1 pull back, we are getting the Sulfurak pulls back, everything is gonna work, so the Mage is gonna be the perfect class to farm all of that, and I am making a Mage for gold myself. Mages also provide a crucial D-course into a raid, and there is a lot of courses in raids. As I told you, you are not gonna be stuck in Druids, and Mages are the only one that can also D-course at the same time, so they are gonna be very valuable for utility in a lot of fights as well. And they even provide a lot of really good CC, like Frost Nova when you're kiting the ads in Ragnaros, all that stuff. Mages are just really useful. They are always useful, and you can stack them. So Mage is gonna go to S tier. There is never a situation where a Mage is not useful. Now the Paladin, of course. Now red Paladins are a meme, they are not gonna be a thing. They are hilarious in PvP. If you want a PvP as a red Pally, fine. God bless you. The Protection Paladin is deceptively good if you get Consecration as a spec for dungeons, not for raids. They are useless in raids, but if you wanna tank dungeons, a Protection Paladin is not a terrible thing to have, okay? I like Protection Paladins for that. And on top of that, guys, we are gonna get dual spec now. So you can get like a protection spec for AoE farming. There are a couple things you can do to farm mobs on your own when you're a Protection Paladin that is pretty cool. And you can tank dungeons pretty well. So now that we got dual spec, I think that's gonna be like a huge perk. That's gonna really push the Paladin up in like its usefulness. The Paladin is a healer through and through. Paladins have the best tank heals in the game because they can just heal you forever. They have infinite mana once they get enough crit. They are really, really strong. On top of that, you also need at least 3 Paladins in a raid because you need Blessing of Salvation, Blessing of Kings, that's 10% more stats, and you're gonna need Blessing of Might or Wisdom depending on if he's a caster or a melee. So the Paladin is always gonna be really important, and you need at least 3. And that's gonna make it so if you're a Paladin, you're gonna have a very easy time getting into groups. So Paladin is gonna be an A. Now for the Priest. Well, the Priest is the best healer in the game. People are gonna tell me that Shadow Priests work now because you can just take 8 Warlocks and the extra damage, they got a debuff that gives you like 10% shadow damage or something. That debuff makes it worth it if you have 8 Warlocks because it is like an extra Warlock. If you take 8 Warlocks to a raid, you're griefing and you should quit the game, okay? I'm sorry, like if you're trying to throw a group together and you take 8 Warlocks because you have to, fine. But nobody intentionally gets 8 Warlocks in a raid, so that's a lie. The Shadow Priest sucks. They are amazing in PvP, they destroy melees in PvP, so if you wanna play a Shadow Priest in PvP, God bless you, really fun, and we got dual spec once again. They suck at farming gold, all they can do is do Dire Maul Tribute, and that's pretty much it. So I would say the Priest is like a solid B in my book. They are always cool to have around, but they are not like insane. In the Alliance they are a lot better actually, because there's no Shamans. That's a whole different topic. Now the Rogue, okay, the Rogue is a warrior but worse. Not a lot worse, mind you. Actually, like if you're a good player, you can beat almost every single warrior, but except the top warriors. I am not trying to insult the rogues. Like, rogues are a fine class, they do a lot of damage, and that's all they do. In PvP, they are some of the best classes in the game, they are broken, they have always been broken in PvP, so they do have a lot of things going for them. It is not clear if we are gonna get the Season of Mastery fix, where they made it so the rogue exposed armor cannot mess with Sunder armor, because what used to happen is that if you got improve exposed armor, which is more armor reduction for the boss, and you try to Sunder armor the boss, you know, like your main tank ability to get threat, it wouldn't let you. It would say something like there is a more powerful spell in the raid, something. So if they fix that, you're gonna have to take at least 1 rogue to get extra armor. Otherwise, I think it's not gonna be like an important utility. Just imagine a rogue like more warriors. Like they are just good DPS and that's it. That's all they have. It is a good thing to have, it is an amazing thing to have, but it is all they have. So they are gonna go down in, let's go with A. Now the Shaman, okay? The Shaman is essentially mandatory. The Shaman is the most important class in the Horde. What does the Shaman bring to the table? They bring Wind Fury. 20% chance every time you auto attack to get another auto attack. It is one of the best melee buffs in the game, especially for warriors because that means more rage. The Shaman is the best AoE healer in the game, and that's without question because they have Chain Heal. Chain Heal is the most mana efficient heal in the game, aside from the Paladin, I guess, because the Paladin got that thing with the crit where they just get free heals. You cannot compete with free, right? But yeah, very efficient heals, very good. They have Mana Tide, which is free mana for the caster group, very important. On top of that, they got Tremor Totem. That's something I forgot to mention about the Priest. If you're a dwarf in the Alliance, you got Fear Ward. Very good to have Fear Ward. It lets you skip a lot of mechanics. The Horde equivalent is the Tremor Totem, which is every 5 seconds you break out of fears in AoE for the entire party. Very good totem to help with a lot of the mechanics. A lot of bosses in vanilla fear you, it is a problem. And one of the main things, in my opinion, for the Horde that makes it a lot easier for casual guilds, they have Poison Totem and Disease Totem. Now, Poison Totem and Disease Totem, they are party wide and they just keep dispelling every 5 seconds over and over and over again. So it is a lot easier. You can keep healing while the poison and the disease are getting dispelled constantly. I cannot understate how important that is. Now, when it comes to the DPS specs, okay, Elemental is not very good, and Enhancement is also quite bad. You can take Nightfall and be a Nightfall bot, and I'm sure some guilds will take you. That's something you can do, I guess. But here's the thing, right? Like, you need a Shaman in pretty much any group, because Shamans provide totems for the party only. And the Shamans also got the Fire Resistance totem, which is great. They even provide the Nature Resistance totem and Frost Resistance totem. So in a not very try-hard guild, that they would gladly take like a crappy DPS Shaman as long as they get more totems. Like, because not every guild is going to have 8 freaking Shamans. It just doesn't happen. So if you want to play a meme spec, I think Shaman is one of the best classes to play a meme spec. Overall, I would say the Shaman is definitely the S tier of support classes. You need 8 Shamans per raid. It's just insanity. Well, maybe 7. It's just the best freaking class out there. And in TBC it's gonna be even stupider. So get used to it. Now the Warlock, okay? The Warlock is kind of like a forgotten class in a lot of senses in vanilla. They are decent at making gold actually, because they can just keep dotting and solo. They can solo a lot of things because they have sustain. They are cancerous in PvP. That's also a plus if you like PvP. They are very good at it. When it comes to raiding on itself, if you're stuck in warriors, you need 1 warlock for course or recklessness. If you are stuck in like 2 caster groups, you need 2 warlocks, and that's it. Their damage is not very good. It will not be very good. They provide a vanish. It's useful sometimes for like guard or something. It's there, you can notice it. But for the most part, they are not very meta. There is not a lot of places where they are like actually needed. And for that reason, I would say sadly, because I also like the Warlock very, very much, that is gonna go on C. Finally, the Warrior, how could I forget? The Warrior is the best DPS in the game. It is not an opinion, it is a fact. It is consistently gonna be #1 DPS in every tier, and it will only get worse as the game goes on. It is completely stupid, brain-dead design. They have a rage mechanic, that's their mana. They just generate mana by doing damage. And the more damage they do, the more rage they get, the more abilities they do. It's like a feedback loop. It is completely broken. We got wall buffs now. The game is completely solved, and warriors are gonna pump like they have always pumped. They are very efficient when you stack them. The thing about warriors and what makes them so good is that they got an ability called Death Wish and an ability called Recklessness. That's a 2 DPS cooldowns that you can stack. I don't recall the duration off the top of my head. Was it 10 seconds or 15 seconds? I don't know. It was some seconds, okay? So if you stack a bunch of warriors in a fight and you make them all pop their cooldowns at the same time, it creates a certain effect. 20 warriors are more than the sum of 20 warriors worth of DPS. Because if they all pop their cooldowns and they pump, that means the boss is gonna die faster, and that means that there is gonna be a higher percentage of the fight where all the warriors had their cooldowns up the whole time. So it is like an exponential kind of feedback effect. The more warriors, the more cooldown uptime, so the more damage for everybody. If you go to like a #1 parse of any class, you're gonna see that the fight is very short usually, and that's for this reason. The warrior also has execute, which is an amazing ability that does a lot of damage when the boss is below 20%, and they can pop their cooldowns during the execute phase if you need to, because a lot of bosses in vanilla have a mechanic that they enrage or they explode or something bad happens if you do not kill them fast enough when they go down on HP. So you can skip a lot of those mechanics with warriors. So warriors are easily the most efficient DPS class in the game. They also never run out of mana, which is great. Of course, the warrior is also the best tank in the game by far. I mean, not even as far as you think, but it is better. And if you're 5% better as a tank, it is like not even a question anymore. You gotta take a warrior because of how threat works. Warriors provide a deceptive amount of value to a raid, and they always will. In a normal raid, you're gonna be taking somewhere along 20 to 24 warriors, okay? Maybe not a normal, that's not a good word. An optimal raid, a traditional try-hard raid, you're gonna be taking that many warriors. It is absolutely bonkers. In a normal guild, they are not gonna take as many because gear You know, if you got 20 warriors, how are you gonna gear them all? That's the problem. But a good old class tag is definitely the vanilla play, and the warrior is the best class in the game. I am sorry, I know it is dumb, it is very dumb, but it is just a fact. And that's why the warrior is traditionally the most popular class in the game, and it will continue to be. This season is gonna be even more so. And yes, I am gonna be playing a warrior. What else am I gonna play? A druid? I mean, come on, man, I'm sorry, it's just I got screwed too. Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.